Hello guys, welcome to lesson 1 of Python for beginners, and I'll be talking about a topic called variable. So a variable is just a reserved memory space where values can be stored, and values can also be referred to as objects or data. So in a nutshell, a variable is just a container or an object itself that accommodates other objects or values or data. And when a variable is being created, this variable will be stored in our computer memory so that we can retrieve the variable and make use of the values, data, or object which is being assigned or stored into that variable. And a variable is a temporary storage space also, because every time we make use of that variable, the location of that variable changes in our computer memory, and I'm going to show you how that works as well. So I'm just going to print out an object on my terminal directly without using a variable. So I'll be using a built-in function called print, and this helps us or allows us to print out results on the terminal. So I'm passing in this is okay. I'm passing in a string object that says hello world, and here my result should be hello world. So as you can see that on the terminal we have our results. So now let's create a variable. To create a variable, we have to give that variable an identity. An identity is just a name given to an object. Remember I said a variable can also be referred to as an object. So an identity is just a name given to a variable or an object. So let's say I have, and also it is very important to give a variable a name that signifies or verifies the kind of value or object or data that is being stored in it. So for example, let's say I have a greet. This is my variable called greet, and here I'm going to store in a string object, and in that string object I'm going to have hello world. So here I have a value which is a string object, and I also have my variable which is greet, and this greet here is just saying that, oh, I'm saying hello to the whole world, and here is an equal sign in between both, and this is referred to as an assignment operator. So in Python there is something we call an assignment statement, and it is a single line of code that contains a variable, an assignment operator, and the value which is being assigned into that variable. So now let's print the variable in on our terminal. So remember we did this earlier. This is us. This is me printing a value directly on the terminal. But instead of doing it this way, I could just pass in my greet variable and print this on my terminal. So here I have my result, which is hello world. So this is just one way of creating a variable, and there are a set of rules that we must follow while creating a variable. One of them is that a variable has to be a single word, just like what we have here. Greet is just a single word, but there are many cases where we have okay, there are many cases where we want to give meaning to the kind of data we have as a value. So I could say my first name, and my first name, let's say Adediji. So here I have a value called Adediji, which is also a string object, and I also have, I'm trying to create a variable here because this is not a variable, because this is not a valid Python code. Now, but I'm having multiple words here that signifies the kind of data I'm trying to store in this variable. So um, my first name has to be a single word, and to do that I'll be using a symbol called an underscore to convert these multiple words into a single word. Now this is a valid Python code, and I can now print my first name on my terminal, which will give me Adidiji. So the second rule is that a variable at some point or at the same time can have both um, word, a word, an underscore, and a single number or multiple number as you please. So I have ID and I have an underscore and I say 1, 2, 3. So this is a valid variable name, and I could just say ID 1, 2, 3, or rather let me just pass in an integer object to this variable. Remember, this is a string object, and here we're having another kind of object which is called an integer object. So I can just print out my ID underscore 1, 2, 3 on my terminal, and let's see the results, which is 1, 2, 3. So here I have a word ID, I have an underscore, and I have numbers with my variable. So I could also just say ID underscore and just give this is also a valid Python code, and as well I could just say ID 1, 2, 3 or 2, 3, 4 and have 2, 3, 4 as my value. So this is also a valid Python code. And okay, that's that with the second rule. The last rule, or rather the third rule, is that a variable cannot begin with a number or a symbol. So let's say I want to start a variable with 2, and let me say I have an underscore and ID, so let's say 2. So this is not a valid Python code because already I'm having an error here. Python is telling me that unexpected invalid token, which means this is not allowed in Python. So we need to scrap this, and also we can't begin a variable with symbols like this, and let's say name. Okay, so here we can just saving my name or storing my name into this variable, but this is not also not a valid Python code, so we need to also scrap this. So we've learned how to create a variable. So let me just show you the different ways we can create variables. So like let's say I have current balance. Okay, so I guess we are still doing the same thing as what we have up here, and I could just say current balance could be, okay, let's say a string and $200. So I have current balance which is $200. I could also have this same current balance as this, yeah, where the first word will be in lowercase, then the first letter of the second word will be in uppercase, and here we have a valid Python code, or rather a valid variable name. So let's say here I'm having $200 as well. So this is also another way to create a variable. They call this camel case method of creating variables. So let's just bring this to see our results on the terminal, and let's see. So we have $200 as our result. So we've seen how we can create a variable. Now let's see how we can modify a variable. Now before we do that, I just want to make sure I say this so that you can understand. Python executes its code from the top downward. So here I'm having a greet I'm having a greet variable here, and let's say to make a change to the value we have stored in this greet variable, we can just recall the name again and storing a new value. So I'm saying hello Deji. I'm saying hello to me. I'm saying hello to myself. So this time around, when I try printing greet to my terminal, I no longer have hello world. I will now have hello Deji. So I have hello Deji here, and this is one way to make changes to a variable. I could as well just say um, hello, then have here, I want to concatenate. Okay, let me take this out, hello, and here I'm just going to, now I'm making reference to the initial value we have at the top here. This hello is what we have here, because this is what is being, this greet function, or rather this greet variable is what we have here, which is just hello. So I could just say plus my name. So this is another way to modify a variable. So when I, now if you, as you can see, I'm storing in this value, because this is going to result to a single value. So I'm storing in this value into that same variable we initially created. So when we print this, I should have, greet should now give me hello Digi. So before we do that, let me give a space here. I have to give a space here so that so that hello and Digi won't be joined together. So here I have, okay, cd into, okay, so here I have my result, which is hello Digi. Let's also make modification to the integer values, like the id 123. So here I'm having 123, I could just say 234. So now I just changed the value which is being stored in our variable id 123, and let's print id 123. So here I should have the results, which is 234. So we've learned how to create a variable, we've seen how a variable can be modified, and also let's see, let's try to get where our variable is being stored in our computer memory. So here, to get the location of a variable in a computer memory, we need to use a function called an inbuilt function, which is called an id function. So with the help of the print function to print on our terminal, I'm going to pass in the id function as well with the variable name. So I'm having greet, or let me just copy and paste this many times as I can for our variable names. So here I have greet, and here I have my first name, here I have id 123, here I have id underscore, and here I have id 123. Should we do for, okay, let's do for current balance as well. So when I print this, okay, when I print this, I have the location of each variable in our computer memory. So our greet variable is located at this location, and my first name variable is located at this location. So these are the ways we can get the location of our variable. So here we've created a variable. You've seen how a variable works. I hope you're looking forward to the next lesson, and we'll be treating data types, but we'll be taking them one after the other. So thank you very much for your time. God bless.